A recent movie entitled Expelled documented how scientists who introduced the possibility of a creator-designer into the discussions regarding the origins of the universe have been blacklisted or forced out of their teaching position. Why is this happening? Why do so many scientists reject the possibility of a creator-designer? Why won't they allow the possibility of a creator-designer to be introduced into the debate in academic institutions? If natural science has such an airtight explanation to the origin of the universe, why doesn't the natural scientist allow the idea of a creator-designer to be debated? Does the possibility of a creator-designer pose a threat to natural science? Does information presented in the Bible offer a better explanation of the origin of the universe than does natural science? These are important questions that have internal implications, and this is what we're going to be discussing tonight in this edition of Answers for a Thirsty World. Good evening, everyone. I'm Steve Van Horn. The theory of evolution was introduced by Charles Darwin in The Origin of Species in 1859. Over the years, what was introduced as theory has become accepted as fact, and the opposing view, which puts forth the idea of a creator, has not only been opposed, but is now being pushed out of the discussion. Why is this happening? Has scientific research proved beyond any doubt that there is no possibility of a creator-designer? Well, to help us find some answers to these important questions tonight is our guest, Dr. Mark Deming. Mark holds a PhD in chemistry from the University of Southern California. He teaches at Portland Community College. He is a member of the American Chemical Society. He's also a member of the Design Science Association. Mark, we want to welcome you to the program, and thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Now, in just a few minutes, we are going to be putting a phone number up on the screen. And when we do that, that will be your opportunity, that will be your invitation to call the program and ask a question of Dr. Mark or myself, or perhaps you have a comment, something that you would like explained. And so when the phone number is put up on the screen, that will be your invitation. And one thing that we're going to be asking tonight is that because of the potential depth of this question, or the question we're answering tonight, and the possibility of some very deep questions that could come, we're going to ask you to try to keep your questions simple, something that I can understand, and something that the average viewer can understand. We don't want the discussion to get too deep and too detailed. We want to keep it down where the rubber meets the road, and as we say, down on the bottom shelf where the kids can get it. So that's the number will be on the phone. The number will be on the screen in just a couple of minutes. Well, Mark, what I want to do as we begin our discussion tonight, and we're talking tonight about, again, the idea of a designer, or evolution, natural science. And what I'd like you to do for our viewers tonight is just in very simple terms, kind of frame the discussion for us, the two general points of view that we'll be looking at tonight.
Well, we can be looking at the origins. I mean, so many different ways of looking at how do you understand the world, how do you understand where the world came from. But what we're looking at tonight is really two basic philosophies. One is that the world is very, very old, and the world has come here through only natural consequences, nothing supernatural. Or the other view is that maybe there was something that was not natural. There was a designer that may have actually started and jump-started things like life, that may have jump-started the universe in general. And so that would be the other view. And in those kind of big topic dividing things, it's either one or the other.
Now, you've seen the movie Expelled.
Yes.
And I did as well. And the whole premise of that show was the idea of those who hold to a view or even want to introduce the topic of a designer, an intelligent designer for the universe, which may or may not be a Christian view, but it's just the idea of a designer,
yes,
that they were being pushed out of the discussion. So to help our viewers understand that just because someone holds to a view of intelligent design doesn't necessarily mean they're a Christian. Can you kind of help us understand the difference there?
Yes, when we're looking at intelligent design overall, Those are people who have looked at evidences in science, evidences in biology, and have decided, there's something here that cannot be explained just by natural causes. They, in general, don't want to get into the issue, is the Earth young, is it old, or even what the age is of the Earth. They're saying, independent of all that, there is something here that we just can't explain in terms of being just natural causes, or at least the way that is tried to be explained so far. As people want to look into this intelligent design, people could be of a whole variety of philosophies, from being Hindu to Christian to Muslim to you could be almost anything and believe in intelligent design. You can be an agnostic and believe in intelligent design. You may believe that there may be something out there, but you just don't know what it is. And you may even think there's a giant computer programmer out there that is programming everything, not necessarily even a God. So intelligent design is really not specific to Christianity.
So would you say that intelligent design is came into being more as to oppose a natural science view, rather than supporting any particular view of creation? It's just saying, wait a minute, natural science doesn't have the answers.
I think it's more along those lines. That though you will find many who are Christians within that community, it's more people that have come up and said science is the answers that science has given us are not satisfactory. There is something out there that needs to be delved into, needs to be looked at, that we're not looking at now. And there's a frustration out there with some scientists. And so they've gone to this, as opposed to going through some special Christian group. They said, you know what, we're not necessarily interested in the religious part of it. We said, we want to look at this independently of all of those issues.
For the natural scientists, let's start looking at each one a little bit individually now, and again, just painting a picture for the viewer. From the natural science point of view, what are the parameters on the age of the universe?
In natural science, usually someone puts in the universe at this point around 14 billion years or so, and it has varied throughout the last 70 or 80 years from 10 billion to 20 billion. It has kind of narrowed down to about 14 billion at this time.
Okay, a long time.
Yeah,
a long time. And they base that on what? I know there's a lot of things. Can you boil it down to a few things that they base that on, just in broad strokes, or is it?
One of the areas that they may base it on is where is the furthest light that is reaching us, that we can tell, and using things like redshifts, they try to find out or try to get to where is the edge of our universe, and that is one of the ways that they've come up with that answer.
Okay, we're going to come back to that a little bit later in the show. Now, those who hold more of an intelligent design model, can we narrow that down to what they are saying as far as the age of the universe between X number of years and X number of years?
Actually, for intelligent design, we can't, because intelligent design just, in general, that topic ignores the age.
Okay.
You have people that, within that community, you have people that believe that the universe is 14 billion years, like mainline science has proclaimed, and there are some that would put it even much younger, 6,000 to 10,000 years.
Okay. We want to come back to those in a minute, but I want to introduce you a little bit more to the viewing audience and let you tell a little bit of your own story. Now, you are a Christian.
Yes.
You've given your life to Jesus Christ, so we'll make that statement. And when was it in your life that you turned that corner and gave your life to Christ?
Actually, I did that at the age of 12.
Mm-hmm.
I went to I wasn't necessarily seeking anything, but I had gone to a small group with some friends of mine, and they were talking about these issues of God and what God could mean to you, and it just struck my heart as right. And at that point, I gave my life to God.
At what point? Well, I'm going to ask you a series of questions here leading up to finding out when you really started getting serious about this science stuff. But let me ask this question. when was it in your life, I'll ask this first, that you knew you wanted to be a scientist?
Actually, that probably wasn't into high school, though.
Okay.
I always wanted to know how things worked. To my family's chagrin, I would pull things apart, and sometimes I'd put it back together. And it wasn't until I was older that I was actually to be able to do that. But I loved to know, how do things work? What are the nuts and bolts?
And when did that questioning enter in, when it came to creation, the universe, the age of the universe? When did those questions start forming in your own mind?
Actually, that I probably, like most people through my life, didn't really care whether the universe is old or young. It was just something that I would learn in school. Oh yeah, the Earth is this old or whatever, and I never really paid much attention to it. I would do all my tests and answer the questions the way I was supposed to, because I know they give you questions, you answer the way that they give you the list of answers you're supposed to have, and you answer that way, and then I was fine. I didn't really have any big question about that until I was in graduate school. And as a Christian, I said to myself, I probably should, some of my friends were asking questions, and I probably should have an answer, because that's, if I'm a scientist, hey, I should be able to have at least some answer for this. And I didn't care whether the Earth was old, whether it was young. I didn't care whether there was evolution or not evolution. It really didn't matter to me. But at that point in graduate school, I decided, well, let me take the hardest position. Let me start with a starting point, because all scientists need to start with a starting point. So I said, let me take the hardest position, that the Earth is young, that God, what Genesis said was literally true, that there was that it was done even in how could this be? It was done even in 7 literal days. And so I said, well, let me take the hardest position to take, and let me then go, as I go through my science, as I start looking at it, start delving into it, let me show that it isn't that. Because sometimes you have to start with something and show. And up to this point, and I've been studying it for 20-odd years, I've not found seminal evidence that shows that it can't be.
So let's go back to that. You said you wanted to take the hardest position. And again, the hardest position is a young creation.
A young creation.
Now, and I know you mentioned this before, but just so our viewers understand what that means, that would say that the universe is how old? What does the young position hold to?
Well, we'd probably say at least the Earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years. The universe, there's a lot as to exactly what is some of the things in Genesis might mean, but you would probably say that I guess you could even try to put the universe into that, though I've not myself. I tend to look at terrestrial and earthly things and see where it is in Earth, because I have a hard enough time keeping my hands in the mud versus trying to touch stars that are so far away. But you could put that into a 6,000 to 10,000 year period, but that would be extremely short. So that'd be potentially, in today's world, many people would say an untenable position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you said, now what? Again, you took that position because you thought it would be the hardest.
Yes.
So somebody who is scientific, a natural scientist, somebody who's just very scientific, is looking at facts, always looking at data, they might say, Mark, that is a dumb place to begin. I mean, don't you begin by accumulating all of the facts and start looking all of the facts and then come to your conclusion? How would you respond to somebody saying that?
I would say that everybody in science always starts with axioms, always start with principles, first principles upon which you're going to base everything on. Everybody comes to the table with a worldview. If you're an atheist, you're going to come to the table saying there cannot be a God, and therefore you're going to have to exclude any godly kind of thing. So if, as scientists, we look at data, but still there needs to be a framework to interpret it. And you always start with, in fact, that's the scientific method. You start with the hypothesis. You get data, and the data to me was all, you have the Earth here. It must have gotten here. Okay, that's part of my data. How then did it get here? And now it's a series of looking at data to assimilate. Something as big as where did the Earth come from, where did we come from, is not a simple thing. You take a few facts and build up. You've got to take a massive amount of facts and try to sift through it. So, but everybody has to start with some guiding principles. You have to start with some initial hypothesis and then work from there. If it's wrong, then you change it.
Well, I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. But what we want to do now is put the phone number up on the screen. And if you have a question or a comment tonight about this topic, does the universe have a designer? If you have a question for Dr. Mark Deming or a comment that you would like to make or bring into the discussion, we invite you to do that. The one thing that we would ask, as I mentioned earlier, is that you try to keep your questions simple enough that I can understand them and that the average viewer out there can understand them. We'd like this to be helpful for the masses, not just for those of you who understand some of the more technical terminology in science. So that would be one thing that we'd be asking of you. But there's the phone number. We invite you to call and become a part of the program. Now, I want to go back to this idea of presuppositions, because I think this is something that's very, very important to understand that I haven't understood until recently. And that's that even in natural science, even from an evolutionary science, you say that there are presuppositions that even the evolutionist would begin with. Is that what you're saying?
Right. You have to assume, for example, that life is here, therefore got here somehow. So you have to start off, well, how could it have got here? And you traditionally in the 1850s, when Darwin was coming up with his particular view of evolution, at that point, there was the current model that says, okay, God did it. But there wasn't much in the way of looking at it deeply. And he said, well, you know what? I don't think that God did it. I think that it happened by itself. And so he came up with the proposition that, well, no, that we can explain things naturally without God. And therefore, let's take God out of the equation altogether. How now can I explain it?
Okay. What I want to do is, can we put the PowerPoint up on the screen? I'm going to go through something here for the viewers. This was probably not new to many, if any at all, but there it is. What we want to do, I'm just going to go through this very quickly, and we're going to show a portion of Genesis chapter 1 in the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God said, let there be light, and there was light. I'm paraphrasing. It's not all here. I've taken out some parts. Then God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and separate the waters from the waters. God said, let the waters be low. So there's more where God said. Then God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and so forth. Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and so forth, talking about the lights in the heavens. It continues, then God said, let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures. So now we see the waters being filled with living creatures. God created the great sea monsters and so forth. Then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth. And God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and so forth. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts. By the seventh day God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. You believe that?
Sure. Until I find evidence not, I believe it.
And so you say that, I want to go back to what your statement was. Did you say that the natural scientist, one of their presuppositions is that God does not exist?
Well, maybe not God does not exist, but God is not involved is probably a better way to put it. Some would say he doesn't exist altogether, and some would say he may be out there, but he's not involved. This is something that just happened on its own.
So can we turn that around then and say that the natural scientist is saying that there must be, and I use the word must carefully here, there must be a natural explanation for everything?
Right, and that's part of the modern day definition of science. It's the naturalistic explanation of the world around it, which means there is no supernatural. You have to always look for the natural. In fact, to exclusion, you have to look for only natural explanations. Anything that smacks of supernatural, you have to ignore, in fact, expel, as we had seen with the documentary. You have to get rid of because it is going to pollute somehow science in general.
I think that is very, very significant, and something that the viewer really ought to think about is, and we put that in the introduction to the program, that the discussion of a creator, designer, is not allowed because of the presuppositions.
Yes.
That allowing a designer would then give the possibility that there is not a natural explanation to everything.
Exactly.
Okay, so you were 12 or so when you became a Christian. In graduate school is when you started investigating these things. And you said that you have never come across any credible evidence yet that would change your view.
No.
So how have you been challenged? Any particular ways that you have been challenged?
Not to say that I understand everything, obviously. In fact, I wouldn't know of any scientist that would ever say, you know what, I understand everything about the universe and the world about me. There are so many questions out there. But what I would say is that is when I come to challenges and I come to things that, well, I'm not quite sure about, I don't initially say, well, you know, somebody gave an answer, it must be true. I always hold out and wait and say, okay, what are the evidences that they chose to use to show their particular viewpoint? And many times when you look at the data itself, the data itself may not even show what they showed, or it can be interpreted in many different ways. Looking at the same data, you don't always see the same things. Depending upon what you want to see, you can see.
So talking about looking at the data, would you say then, or are you saying that you've already made this statement, that as a creationist, you start with a presupposition? What is, just to clarify that, what is your presupposition as a creationist?
Mine would be, and to clarify this too, I believe that life on Earth was created at one time. Within within that sequence of 7 days, so that all of life and all the DNA and all the things about life came about suddenly, and did not one thing evolve into another, as opposed to the naturalistic way of looking at it is we start with a single cell or maybe a few different cells somehow around the Earth, got to the place that somehow they got jump-started, which is a huge question in and of itself. And once they got started, they were able to somehow, through having essentially things go wrong or having mutations, they were able to transform themselves into different creatures. And these creatures themselves were branched off and formed other creatures that are alike. And so therefore, you look at things that might have similar features. The idea in evolution is that these features came from a common ancestor. And ultimately, the common ancestor was maybe a single bacteria of some sort.
Yeah, I've got some things I want to talk about in that regard in just a minute. Again, the phone number is on the screen. You are invited to call and to be a part of the program. If you have questions or comments regarding this particular topic tonight. Just a little more clarification as far as presuppositions. I want the audience, the viewers, to understand something here. I'm a math major, so I understand some of the basics here. But if you start with a presupposition that is flawed, then what's going to happen to your conclusions?
It depends on your willingness to look outside the box. If your presupposition is flawed and you want to hold on to it with dear life and you do not want to let go of it, then everything that you do after that is going to be based upon that flaw. In fact, sometimes you'll get to the place where things have gone so far awry from your theory, but you've still got to make that theory work that you'll keep on putting Band-Aids on it here and there until the thing looks very, very unwieldy. But you've got to keep with it, and unfortunately, people have done that with science throughout the ages. And sometimes people have said, you know what? Hey, we've got to make a change here. This is just not working out, and we've had some great advances in science. Sometimes, though, the balls people have held onto the ball so long that they're unwilling to even let go of their view, thinking, you know what, I have the answer. There is no other answer. And when you get to the place where you say, I have the answer, there is no other answer, you've you've eliminated possibilities that of avenues of research and of looking to discover. You've basically closed them off.
And again, we go back to the movie Expelled and how people are being blacklisted and pushed
Yes.
out because they're wanting to bring in possibilities of a designer. We have a caller from Tigard. Are you there?
Yes.
Welcome to the program. I saw your name, but I didn't catch it. I saw it over here shown to me, but I missed it. Who are you?
What's that?
Okay, just what's your question?
Oh, well,
It's Dr. Finley from Tigard. I see that now.
yeah. I was interested in all this philosophy you have.
Thank
How
you.
does
Do you have a question, sir?
this issue of hell factor in from a grand designer point of view?
The factor of hell?
Yes.
That's a good question. We'll let you go, and we'll answer that for you. We start getting off in a little bit different area, so
Right.
I'll allow you to give at least a brief answer.
Though one could, that I imagine could be, several shows worth. How does if you're talking about heaven and hell in general, if one is a Bible believer, you're going to believe there's a heaven and a hell. If one is a Hindu, you may not believe there's a hell. On the other hand, in terms of the issue that we're talking about today, we're talking about is there evidence for a designer here on Earth? The issue then of hell is a separate issue that we could talk about, but it's not something I can go and talk about in terms of the biology or talk about DNA or fossil records. I don't know if that would have any view on that.
Let me, and I'll add to Mark's answer on that. I would say this, trying to make it brief and simple, that if there is a creator designer, and if it's the God as the Bible describes him, then that designer had a very good reason in creating what he created. And he wanted to create a human race that would worship and love him. And sin entered in, and we'll be talking about that later at the end of the program. Sin entered in, which from a human perspective brought a little bit of confusion. God knew what was going on. But then through that, God had also created a place where those who were loyal to him would spend eternity. Those who were not loyal to him would spend eternity, the creation of heaven and hell. And it gets into a lot of why God would allow anybody to go to hell. Isn't he a loving God? And that's a whole other topic. But what needs to be understood is God is a holy God. And God would violate his holiness if he allowed anything that was unholy into heaven. So there has to be an alternative to heaven. And since none of us are righteous, not like God is righteous, our sin has to be paid for. And that's why, according to the biblical account, God sent his son, Jesus Christ, to pay the penalty for our sin so that none of us have an excuse, that God created heaven for all of us, and by rejecting his offer of salvation, then he has to have an alternate place as well. So it goes into a big picture of why, not just is there a designer, but why there is a designer and what he had in mind as he created the heavens and the earth and man upon it and so forth. So it's a broader question, but it's a good question, so I appreciate that. Mark, what I'd like to do, and if you have other questions, we invite you to call and be a part of the program. But what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about presuppositions. And one in particular, there's an article that I was shown, and it's this comes off of Reuters. It goes back to May 21st, and it says supernova caught exploding on camera. And these are the types of things that we hear from the science community. And without getting into the detail, this happened in real time, so it wasn't just something that happened a long time ago. And we have another call. I'll get to you in just a minute. that we are just now seeing the light, but they claim that they have seen it in real time. It happened right now. But they said that it was 88 million years ago, by Earth time and so forth. And we'll get to the caller in just a moment. But help us understand, if they are looking through these telescopes and they're seeing light, and they have determined that that light was created 88 million years ago, light years ago, how can we say the Earth is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old?
Very good question. I don't know if I have every answer for that,
right.
But one of the things that we have to understand about science is that we are doing science on this little tiny speck in the universe called Earth, in a little tiny solar system, which is our solar system, which is in our galaxy. So we're only know what we know about science from what we can determine here on Earth. So we make a lot of speculations. Some may be good, some may be not so good, about what happens further away. At the speed of light that we measure today in the laboratory, within the gravity well of Earth, within the gravity well of our sun, in a vacuum, it has a certain speed. Now, when we try to look at something that is very far away, what we'll notice is that some things are moving away from us. Now, some things we can actually measure the distance by using parallax, so we can actually make physical measurements of where it is. And we know our particular galaxy is about 100,000 light years, and I wouldn't say that would be wrong. But we don't know that light always travels the same in between gravity wells as it does in the gravity wells. We don't know that light the light speed has been the same throughout all of history. We have measurements in the past within error bars have shown that the speed of light has been slightly faster in the 1850s than it is today, and it showed a progression apparently getting slower. And it was just proclaimed in the 1940s that, the speed of light we want to make it constant, so it is constant. We've only been studying these things for maybe 200 years or so. We've not been studying them for 1,000 years. So science is actually, in terms of a lot of the evidences we find, it's been a very short time that we've been studying things, and we make a lot of grand proclamations about our universe in general from very small amounts of data that we have.
So again, what you're saying here, and we do have a caller from St. Helens, Tom will be with you in just a moment, that there are assumptions that come into play.
Yes.
And that's that the speed of light is constant from all time,
right,
throughout in all places in the
right.
universe. And we know that there are places in the universe where, correct me if I'm wrong, that things are more dense than other places.
Yes.
And so it would seem logical that light could speed up or slow down depending on the consistency in any particular part of the universe.
Right. Exactly.
Good. We do have a caller, so we want to bring the caller on. Is it Tom from St. Helens? Tom, welcome to the program. Is Tom there? Tom is gone. That's two straight callers. Maybe we're answering their questions for them before they come on the air. Let's put the PowerPoint back up on the screen. There's some things that I want to go through here and lead us through some more of this discussion. We're all familiar with layers of rocks, and we've studied this in our schooling. And let's see. The question that we want to ask is how quickly the rock layers form, and I've got this information off of seekinggod.co.uk off the internet, just to give credit. The time scales are driven by two things. There's evolution, and it says that evolution demands, and now listen to that there has got to be millions and millions of years for things to evolve. For example, to believe that a single-celled creature in the Precambrian layer, and you may have to correct me on some of these technical words, have evolved into fish into the Devonian layer.
Right.
Would have taken millions of years. Therefore, that is how long it has taken for those layers to have formed. Therefore, so they're assuming some things there. And now let's just keep going. There's some other things I want us to see. Then there's radiometric dating. The scientific measurements that are used in radiometric dating can be totally accurate, but the end result will be unreliable because of the assumptions it is based on. So let's keep going, and we'll let you comment on these in a minute. So what actually is radiometric dating? These are methods that estimate the age of rocks by using the decay rates of radioactive elements. Would carbon-14 dating be one of those?
Not for rocks.
Okay, not for rocks, but that's a different type. Okay, how reliable is it? For the method to work, now here's what's interesting. For the method to work, it needs stable, constant conditions for the decay rate to remain constant with no contamination from outside. Again, a presupposition. This is it, for it to be stable, this has to. Tom is back from St. Helens. Tom, please hang in there until I get through a couple more lines. The starting conditions need to be known. Also, the relationship between the data obtained and the specific event which caused a crystallization must be known. So is this statement true? Here's a statement. Fossil dating is accurate since the method follows strict scientific guidelines. The answer, the actual measuring of the elements is accurate, but the calculations are based on assumptions. So it's back to what we're saying, that again, assumptions are a part of even dating rocks.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to give you a chance to comment on this, but let's take Tom's call. Tom, are you there this time from St. Helens?
Yes, I am.
Great. Thanks for coming back. What's your question, sir?
Sometimes I think interpretations of the Bible sometimes aren't looked at in a different way. And the way I look at it is that the universe was always here and it was always void, such as the earth, and God is only 6,000 years old. Could you address that for me?
Well, that'd be interesting. It doesn't. That would be a different kind of Bible, and you would say then that the universe created or made God, and therefore that is something that would not be within the biblical framework that I would see in reading the Bible.
Yeah,
An interesting interpretation, but I don't see how that it would be relevant.
Let's just go back
to
to the data. We're talking about data, and it begins, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created.
Right.
The heavens and the earth. So God created the heavens and the earth in the beginning. There's no way that they could have been here before him.
Right.
So again,
Exactly.
We're dealing with the data that's presented before us. And as you mentioned earlier, you start with the data, now you begin to look around and see if there's any evidence to support the data. The data.
Yes.
And you've said you've been doing that for 20 years.
Yes.
And you haven't found any evidence that would cause you sleepless nights. Well, maybe a sleepless night or two, but as far as giving up your view.
Exactly.
Okay. Tom, are you still there? Okay, we have Richard now from Milwaukee. Richard, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Great. Thanks for calling. What's your question?
I'm sorry. Let me catch my breath real quick. We were talking about presuppositions, and the argument is between atheist and a deist. And the last caller was kind of a gray area between believing in a God or believing in no God. And so my question was about perhaps taking the opposite view, and if you are an atheist, then trying to understand from a different presupposition from the deist. For the deist, you would be like the prodigal son for a moment and run away from what you were taught. But in the end, I think that taking the opposite presupposition between these two extremes would be helpful for either side.
Granted, that would be true. It's always useful to look at the arguments and counter arguments on both sides and to check to see if there is any merit in what they're saying. And if you just listen to your own voice and never listen to what anybody else says, then you're losing out on potential ways to come up with a clearer understanding of our universe around us. It is, in fact, that's the very thing we're saying today. Is science has said, you know what? We can't even look at the universe in the way that you're saying. In fact, we're just going to close our ears to it. We're going to make sure it doesn't ever, you can't publish any evidence that even leads towards it. And that, in fact, if you start even talking that direction, you're going to lose your position, because we only want people that go with our view, because we feel, we have faith. They don't use the word faith, but it literally is faith, that what they believe is true. So true that you have to get rid of anything that is different. And that is not really the way science should be run. And you're right, people should be able to look at both sides and say, okay, let's look at the evidence. And unfortunately, in our world today, that is not the way that science is working.
Have you looked at both sides, Mark?
I try to look at both sides. Actually, I have, to me, if the earth is and the universe is old, or if God used evolution, or if I'm probably not going to veer from the God, but if God could have used evolution, it wouldn't bother me a bit, because I figure, well, if there's God, God can do whatever he wants to do. The question is there terrestrial evidence that shows that it is true?
See, that's the key right there, and we want the viewers to understand that, is there are presuppositions on both sides. Now you look at the data. And to have an objective debate, both sides have to look at the same data and then start analyzing the data and see which of the presuppositions hold up. And what you're saying is, on the natural side, they're not taking all the evidence. And we've got some other examples here on PowerPoint that shows that very thing.
Right.
You still there, caller? Is it Richard?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have one more question.
Yes, sir.
Don't you think it would take an equal amount of faith to believe in a God than it would take to believe there is not a God?
To me, I think there is a huge amount of faith in believing there is no God.
Well, whatever position that you take, you have to take faith to stand on that presupposition. The opposite of that would be that there is nothing that you can know, and the only truth that you can find the only truth that you can find in the universe is what you experience yourself, or rather internal experiential evidence.
Right, which is probably not the way that most scientists would look at it. Most scientists believe that there is evidence out there that is external to themselves. It's a question of whether that evidence points to a God or away from a God, and many feel that that a God is not necessary in their world. That science and evolution can explain everything away that we've ever seen, and therefore it has become a moot point, or not necessary. So even if there is a God, he's not necessary.
Thank you for calling, Richard. And Richard, just a comment here. I understand your point, and I think there are some valid thoughts there, is because he's saying there's faith on both sides.
Yes.
But here's why it's important to investigate it. Here is why it's important to investigate it, and investigate it seriously. Because the Bible talks about a creator. I mentioned this to one of the callers just a couple of callers back. The Bible mentions a creator, and not just the fact that there is a creator, but he had a very intentional reason for creating what he created. And he created man and put man on the earth, man and woman, and that he wanted to have a relationship with them. Because God is holy, man needed to remain holy, and for Adam and Eve, there was only one thing that they could do that was considered sin, wrong, anti-God, falling short of God's standard, and that was to eat from that tree in the garden. But here's the point, that God created all of us to have a relationship with him. But because all of us sin and fall short, and that can be an unkind word, it can be getting angry, anything that falls short of God's holiness, then we can't have that eternal relationship with him that he desires. And so the Bible also says he sent Jesus Christ, his son, to die on a cross to pay the penalty for our sin, so that when we acknowledge that and recognize that Jesus did pay the penalty for our sin, for our falling short of God's standard, now we can be renewed to that relationship. So these questions are not just here and now questions and not just academic questions, but these questions have eternal implications. And so I would really encourage you to investigate it. And as Mark has said, he started with a presupposition that what the Bible says is true. He's accepted that. He believed that from the beginning, but he has been willing to look at evidence to see if there's any evidence to prove otherwise. And he can't find anything that would throw out the creator of the Bible, as he's admitted that maybe there's some dating things that he's still open to investigate, but as far as whether the God of the Bible did it or not, I think that that's something that he has settled on. So there's eternal implications, and I think it's important that you, all of us, would be to take serious thought, serious consideration of that. Let's quickly, I want to go through a couple of other things here on the PowerPoint presentation. We have time for another caller. But here is a radiometric dating, finding acceptable dates. Here is another example of this. When a date differs from the expected plan of things, the result is rejected. And it is known as posterior reasoning. Posterior, I guess, means going backwards. This really shows that radiometric dating has many serious problems. Here's an example. Researchers applied posterior reasoning to the dating of Australopithecus.
Australopithecus, right.
Okay, I came close. Ramidus fossils, a species of primate, and most samples of the basalt rock, is it basalt or basalt?
Basalt.
Basalt rock, closest to the fossil, gave dates of about 23 million years by the Argonne method. So here is this fossil. They look at samples right around it, and they show, okay, because of what's around it, it must be 23 million years old. Now, look at this. But this was decided that this was too old according to their beliefs on where these fossils fitted into the evolutionary scheme. So they already had presuppositions of where they fit in,
exactly,
even before they started looking at the date. So they took 26 basalt rock samples which were further away from the fossils. 9 samples, again, gave very old dates. So it was decided that they must be contaminated and discarded them. So again, they didn't fit our model, therefore they must be contaminated. The remaining 17 samples gave an acceptable maximum age of 4.4 million years, so that's what they used. Here's an example of starting with a presupposition. This fossil must be about this old to fit into our model. The original evidence says it's not, so they throw that out and they keep looking for evidence, searching until they can come up with some excuse to place this in where they want it.
Right.
That's how it works?
That is not that uncommon within geologic circles to do that, because already many of the rock layers, for the most part, have already been kind of assigned ages. And because of evolution, you kind of already know through evolutionary framework roughly how much time you have for everything to fit within that scheme. And so you can't have things too far out of whack. Many times they're using sedimentary layers in which the potassium is in all soils. The trouble is potassium produces as a daughter product argon, and argon is a gas which can potentially percolate out. Therefore, many times even some of the soils they use that are in that they would love to use, they have to keep on giving fudge factors or scale factors because it gives a date that's way out of range. But if they scale it right, it will give roughly the right date. And so you see a lot of this going on, especially with sedimentary layers, which are very notoriously hard to date because water can leach in materials, can bring them out. You have to make a lot of assumptions for these dating techniques to be worked out. And many times, when you send a sample in, they even ask the question, how old do you think it is? And what layer of rock do you think it is?
I was about to ask that. Something I was reading, and I won't look at the rest of the PowerPoint. We've got a caller. We'll get to you in just one moment. So, and we're getting short on time here. But that's something that I saw, again, on the research I was doing today, that when they bring in a sample, oftentimes they hand them a form and say, how old do you think this should be?
Right.
To fit the model.
It's because that they want to know in the laboratory, even though the technique can measure things very carefully, they need to know that if they get the wrong ratio, they need to know if that's a bad data point, and therefore it can be ignored. And therefore they can keep on looking until they find the ones that are the good samples. The trouble is you can't look at a sample and know it's good. The only way you can tell is if it fits what you kind of already know it to be.
Oh, there's so many other things I'd like to talk to you about that I've questions that I have, but I'm not sure we're going to have time tonight. We have a caller. The caller is it Nancy?
Yes.
Yes, Nancy. Thank you for your patience. What's your question?
Hi. My name is Nancy. I'm from Beaverton. Back to your thing. I have a husband who's 96. I'm 54 right now, and just a little joke back to your comments about fossilization. He's pretty much fossilized, but I have a question about serious dating, and what's your concern on serious dating? Because I'm 54 and he's basically double my age, and I don't know what I should do with him because he's basically to dust and is going to.
Okay, I'm not sure
if I can answer that one. That's not my realm of knowledge.
No, I think that she was using the word fossil and kind of translating that over into a social condition as opposed to a scientific condition. We're not into social conditions tonight. I want to, let's just, one more thing. We've got about 5 or 6 minutes. I want to bring if I can, I may have just lost the whole thing here. Let's go. I want to bring up something here. I'm not gonna take time to look at all this. I just want to find one more slide here at the end of this.
Oh, can I mention something?
Yeah, go right ahead while I'm looking for it.
While you're looking, and my daughter actually asked me to even say this.
Okay.
One of the things about evolution today in science, and it used to be, for example, chemistry was said to be the central science. It was a science that you can base everything on because you go in the laboratory, you can measure. But these days, it is pushed so hard that evolution is the central science. Even though it's not proven, we don't even know where life began, yet we're saying we know that evolution is true. And it is said that you cannot understand biology unless you understand evolution. The trouble is, people in biology understand biology all the time without having to understand about anything about where it came from. You open it, you get a cell, you figure out how the chemicals work. Those need no presupposition of how it works. That it works very similar in a bird versus in us, okay, it works similar. It just makes it easier to do investigations, but it does not start the initial investigation. You have to start it somewhere, irrespective of who is related to who. So the idea that evolution is a central science is very irritating to her, that is pushed upon her and said, you have to believe this, because you can't understand science without it. And to me, that is ludicrous.
We have one other caller. Barrett, we're very short on time. We can give you about a minute or so.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to say my view is I believe what Carl Sagan said back in the 80s when he was doing Cosmos, that series Cosmos.
Mm-hmm. Yes, quickly, yes. Please.
He says the cosmos is everything that is, ever has been, and ever will be. And we're just in the very middle. And infinity is actually like, if you understand the concept of infinity, it's like everywhere in the whole entire cosmos is the center. You could be 500 quadrillion light years from here, even though we can't see that far, even our radio telescopes can't detect anything that far, is just as much the very center as here. And since we're all made out of atoms and molecules, just like the ground that we walk on and
quickly,
the chairs we sit on and everything, food we eat, the planet, the solar system, the star, everything, is made out of atoms and elements. And there's no real difference between one atom and another, except for one might be...
You need to wrap up.
In here, and the other one might be there. But if in infinity, nothing can be created in the sense of bringing something in from nothing. I believe that there is a creation, and that's...
We're going to have to let you go.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Okay. I wanted to ask him what the source of his authority was on that. Of course, Carl Sagan, he's not with us anymore. Well, we need to wrap things up. I was going to have you talk about the Neanderthal man, but we'll have to. Will you come back another time? And
I would love to.
We'll talk about some other things. I want to talk to you about the flood that took place in Genesis chapter 7 and 8, and just the significance of that, whether it was worldwide or local, and the implications on evolution as well. So we'll do that at another time. Well, as we finish up tonight, first of all, I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank the callers for coming as well, or for calling. And as we finish up, I'm going to have to, you guys back there, this is, I'm being told there's 2 different times here. You're telling me one time. This thing over here is telling me another time. So not sure what to do there. So they're telling me I've got a minute. See, that's what you get with live TV when you're getting different signals from different places. But we want to thank all of you for watching tonight. And as we said, these have eternal implications, these questions, because if there is a creator, and if the creator is as described in the Bible, then he wants to have a relationship with you. He's got a place created called heaven that only those who have a personal relationship with him will be invited to come after they leave this earth. And that is accomplished by receiving Jesus Christ. As I've mentioned during the program, he died for you because God is holy and man is sinful. And the only way that we can have forgiveness of sin and know the relationship that God wants us to have is by receiving Christ, by acknowledging that he died for our sins, and that he is the payment for us. So that is the message of the Bible. We thank you for calling. And Mark, thank you again for being with us.
You're welcome.